Spring break at Lake of the Ozarks, the dirt road narrowed to almost nothing, the forest pressing in on either side, branches scraping the windows of Bobby's beat-up Jeep. The sun was sinking fast, turning the lake ahead into a sheet of molten gold. Jinx, riding shotgun, flicked her lighter nervously, the click-click of metal sharp in the cramped space. She leaned forward, squinting for the windshield. "You sure this is the right place?" Bobby smirked. "You questioning my sense of direction again?" Behind them, Regina groaned. "I'm questioning the fact we haven't seen a single sign of life for 30 minutes. This place better have Wi-Fi." "Pretty sure that's the point," Trevor added from beside her, eyes glued to the map on his phone, though the signal had long since dropped. Off-grid. No neighbors. No rules. The Jeep rolled into a clearing right on the water's edge, the trees arching overhead like they were closing in behind them. An old wooden sign, barely visible in the brush, read, "Hollow Creek Campsite." The letters worn and splintered, almost swallowed by moss. The lake stretched wide and glassy before them, its surface eerily still. Jinx flicked her lighter one more time, staring at the reflection of the tree line on the water. The air smelled like rain, and something else, something stale. "Perfect," Bobby said, throwing the Jeep into park. But Jinx wasn't so sure. There was something about the way the trees leaned too close, like they'd been waiting. The group piled out, stretching, shaking off the long drive. Bobby cracked open a beer before even pulling the gear from the back, raising it toward the fading sun. "Here's to a legendary spring break." His voice echoed too loud against the still water, the sound bouncing back at them with an odd delay. Jinx lingered near the Jeep, eyes scanning the tree line, feeling that prickle on the back of her neck that never boded well. Regina snapped a quick selfie with Trevor, flashing a peace sign, forcing a grin. "This'll look great once we're all sunburnt and wasted." But her voice felt thin, her eyes darting toward the dense wall of trees like she half expected something to step out. Trevor unpacked the tents, focusing on the task, but every so often his gaze would drift to the lake watching, as if waiting for it to ripple. As they set up camp, Jinx wandered down to the shoreline. The lake stretched endlessly ahead, the far side obscured by a mist that clung too low to the water, even in the warm spring air. She crouched, trailing her fingers across the surface. It was colder than it should have been. Movement caught her eye, a flicker beneath the water, just out of reach. But when she blinked, it was gone. That night, after the fire cracked and popped high, the group sat in a loose circle, laughing, telling stories. But the laughter faded quicker than it should have. Every time someone paused to take a breath, the silence rushed in, heavy and full. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees, a soft chime rang out. Once, twice, faint, like wind brushing through a hollow pipe. "Who brings wind chimes to the woods?" Regina asked, her voice too loud in the quiet. No one answered, because the wind wasn't blowing. Jinx glanced across the fire at Trevor, catching his eyes lingering on her just a second too long before he looked away. She gave him a half-smile, though it didn't quite settle the tightness in her chest. They'd flirted for months, casual, nothing serious, but out here, away from the noise of campus life, it felt heavier, real. But even now, even with the soft glow of the fire casting shadows across his face, something in the darkness beyond him felt like it was watching them both. As the fire burned lower, Trevor moved closer, shoulder brushing Jinx's lightly, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "You okay?" She nodded, but the question stayed in the air between them, thick with unspoken tension. His knee bumped against hers, warm and grounding, but the weight of the woods pressed in stronger than the comfort of his touch. Somewhere out on the lake, the faint splash of water echoed too loud, too close, though nothing moved in the reflection. Bobby, half drunk, stood suddenly, wobbling slightly. "I'm gonna take a leak." He stumbled off toward the tree line, disappearing into the shadows. Regina hugged her arms tighter around herself, staring into the fire like she could will the world outside it away. Minutes ticked by. Too many. The laughter never returned. Trevor stood, eyes scanning the dark where Bobby had vanished. "He's taking too long." His voice cracked at the edges, uncertain. Jinx felt his hand brush hers before he moved away, following the narrow trail into the trees. "I'll check on him." Jinx hesitated, staring into the dark mouth of the woods where Trevor had disappeared. The crackle of the fire was the only sound, until, once again, the soft ringing of chimes drifted through the air, closer this time. She turned to Regina, but the girl was staring wide-eyed into the trees, her lips moving silently. "What?" Jinx whispered. Regina's answer sent a chill through her bones. "I think I just saw Bobby standing at the edge of the lake." Jinx's stomach dropped. "That's not possible," she whispered, eyes darting toward the woods where Trevor had gone. But Regina didn't move, her face pale, fixed on the shoreline. Slowly, Jinx turned her head toward the lake. There, just at the edge where the moonlight kissed the water, stood Bobby motionless, facing the trees, his body too still, too rigid. "Bobby?" Jinx called out, her voice barely carrying. No response. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there, the lake lapping quietly at his boots. Regina grabbed Jinx's arm, her nails digging in hard. "We should go get him," Regina said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Jinx felt it too, that primal instinct telling her not to get closer. Before either of them could decide what to do, a branch snapped behind them. They spun, hearts pounding, only to see Trevor stumbling back into the clearing, eyes wide, his chest heaving. "He's not there," Trevor gasped, shaking his head. "I went all the way down the trail. He's not anywhere in the woods." His gaze drifted toward the lake. He froze. They turned back together, but the shoreline was empty now. Bobby was gone. Only the faint ripple of disturbed water remained. "I swear he was right there," Regina whispered, her voice cracking, eyes filling with tears. Trevor grabbed Jinx's hand, squeezing hard, grounding her, but in the silence that followed, they all heard it, the unmistakable sound of 2 sharp chimes, floating in from across the lake, deeper into the dark. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of ozone, and in the distance, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the lake. The wind stirred suddenly, snapping the flames of their fire sideways, scattering embers into the night. Overhead, clouds gathered fast, smothering the stars. Trevor's grip on Jinx's hand tightened, and for a brief second the warmth of his skin kept her tethered. But the world around them was changing, the woods growing darker, more alive. Lightning forked in the distance, illuminating the tree line for a heartbeat. In that flash, Jinx swore she saw figures between the trees, thin shapes, too tall, their limbs crooked at unnatural angles. When the darkness snapped back, the shadows pressed closer, and the wind brought another sound, the faint clang of chimes, twisted by the rising storm. Regina stumbled back, arms hugging herself, whispering Bobby's name like a prayer. The first drops of rain came hard and cold, splattering across their faces, sizzling as they hit the dying fire. Thunder cracked again, louder now, shaking the ground beneath them. Trevor turned to Jinx, his face pale, his words frantic. "We can't stay out here. We need to get to the tents before this hits hard." But even as he said it, Jinx felt her eyes drift toward the lake, toward the place where Bobby had stood, feeling an invisible pull. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the clearing, flattening the flames, drenching them in seconds. The wind howled through the trees like a scream, the storm swallowing their campsite whole. As they ran toward the tents, lightning split the sky again, and in that flash, Jinx saw Bobby standing knee-deep in the water, his back still turned, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for something beneath the storm. But the darkness snapped back again, leaving only the roar of the wind, the pounding rain, and the echo of a faint chime. Jinx dove into the tent, pulling Regina in after her, the walls of thin nylon shaking violently against the wind. Trevor zipped it shut behind them, his soaked clothes clinging to his skin, his breath coming fast. The storm raged outside, each gust of wind flattening the tent walls against their bodies, making them feel as though the forest itself was pressing down, trying to smother them. The sharp ping of rain against the fabric was deafening, but beneath it they could still hear the chimes, faint but steady, like they were swinging right outside. Regina sat curled in a ball, rocking slightly, eyes wide, whispering Bobby's name again and again, but her voice was drowned beneath the storm. Trevor knelt beside Jinx, his hand gripping her knee tightly, grounding them both. When the storm lets up, he panted, "We're leaving. First light. We pack and go." But Jinx's mind spun in circles, unable to focus on escape, only on what she'd seen Bobby, standing in that lake, unmoving, listening to something they couldn't hear. A sudden snap of a branch cracked loud outside, followed by a dragging sound, something scraping across the ground, circling the tent. Jinx froze, holding her breath, her pulse pounding so loud she couldn't tell if it was thunder or her own heart. Trevor looked at her, his face pale, lips mouthing, "What is that?" The dragging continued, slow, deliberate around them, stopping just at the front flap. Lightning flashed again, casting shadows across the tent walls. A silhouette appeared, long limbs, a tall frame bending unnaturally close, head cocked to the side. They couldn't see a face, but they knew it wasn't Bobby. The figure stayed for a breathless moment, as though watching, and then the dragging started again, fading slowly into the rain. The storm kept raging, but the three of them sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. And just before the thunder rolled again, the wind carried two soft chimes, swinging somewhere just outside the tent. The moment the dragging noise faded, Trevor turned to Jinx, his grip tightening on her arm. "We can't stay here," he hissed, voice barely above a whisper. "We pack up now. Forget the storm, we run for the jeep." His words came fast, frantic, like the fear was finally breaking loose inside him. Regina shook her head violently, pulling her knees tighter to her chest. "No. We wait. We wait until the sun comes up. We're not going out there in the dark." "Did you see what I saw?" Trevor snapped, gesturing toward the tent wall like it could still hold the shadow pressed against it. "We're sitting ducks in here. If that thing comes back, if Bobby comes back, we're trapped." His voice cracked on Bobby's name, and Jinx flinched. Regina's eyes flashed with panic, but she pushed back, her voice rising. "Bobby is out there. We can't just leave him." Trevor sat back on his heels, running a hand through his soaked hair, the tension in his body shaking. "That wasn't Bobby," he growled, barely able to keep the fear out of his tone. "Whatever's out there, it's not him. And if you want to wait around for it to come back, be my guest." Jinx stepped between them, her voice low but firm, heart racing as the storm howled outside. "Stop. We can't fight each other right now." Silence fell between them, broken only by the steady hammering of rain against the tent. Jinx's eyes flicked between Trevor and Regina, both of them shaking, breathing too hard, neither willing to back down. The tension in the small space pressed heavier than the storm outside. And in that silence, the chimes rang again, closer than before, as if to remind them none of them were in control. Jinx swallowed hard, her voice trembling. We stick together. We wait out the storm just until first light. Then we leave, all of us. Trevor looked like he wanted to argue again, but the wind outside rose to a wail, snapping the tent walls inward, silencing him. He nodded once, though his eyes stayed locked on the zipper, as if expecting it to slide open at any moment. The hours dragged, the storm outside relentless, thrashing against the tent walls like the forest itself wanted in. Every crack of thunder vibrated through their bones, and with each lull, the faint sound of chimes crept back in, swinging steady, patient. None of them spoke. Trevor sat by the entrance, gripping a flashlight so tightly his knuckles whitened, ready to bolt the moment the rain eased. Regina hugged her knees, rocking faintly, mouthing silent prayers into the crook of her arm, and Jinx sat frozen between them, listening to the storm and the thing beneath it. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering, casting brief flashes of shadow across the tent walls. Trevor cursed under his breath, smacking it once, but the light only dimmed further. In the flickering beam, a shadow shifted outside a tall, thin silhouette, unmoving, standing at the edge of the tent. All three froze, breath held, the air between them charged with terror. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the outline more clearly. Long arms, crooked at the elbows, head tilted too far to the side. It stood there, framed in that brief burst of light, as though waiting for them to see it. Trevor lunged for the zipper, hand shaking as he fumbled with it, but Jinx grabbed his wrist hard. "No!" she hissed, her voice sharp, pulling him back. "You opened that, and we're dead." Trevor's chest heaved, eyes wild, but he didn't argue this time. He let go, the flashlight clattering to the floor, its beam flickering to nothing. The tent walls pressed inward again, the figure still visible in the faint glow of distant lightning. And then it moved. Slow, deliberate, circling the tent with that dragging sound beneath its feet, the chimes ringing softly behind it. Closer, circling. Jinx's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst, her breath locked tight in her throat. The thing outside knew they were trapped, and it wasn't leaving. The dragging circled slower now, as if it was savoring their fear, scraping closer to the tent with each pass. Jinx pressed her hand over her mouth, stifling the gasp rising in her throat, her eyes locked on the thin fabric between them and whatever waited outside. Regina's silent rocking turned to quiet sobs, her body trembling as she buried her face in her hands. Trevor's fists clenched in his lap, knuckles pale, every muscle in his body taut like a spring ready to snap. The chimes followed the dragging, swinging gently with the rhythm of its movements taunting them. A sudden gust of wind flattened the tent wall, inches from Jinx's face, and she swore she felt the outline of fingers pressing through the fabric, dragging slowly downward. She jerked back, heart slamming against her ribs, and Trevor lunged to help, his arm steadying her, though his own body shook. Outside, the dragging stopped. Silence settled in for a heartbeat unnatural, heavy, worse than the sound itself. Then, without warning, the thing outside slammed a hand against the tent wall, shaking the whole structure, the sound sharp, vicious. Regina screamed, curling tighter against herself, while Trevor scrambled to hold the tent upright, his body shielding them from the collapsing wall. Another slam, harder this time, sending ripples through the fabric. The rain outside kept hammering, but the storm seemed quieter compared to the chaos pressing in around them. "It knows we're here," Jinx whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Trevor turned toward her, his face pale and slick with rain, his jaw clenched tight. "What does it want?" Regina sobbed, gasping for breath, but no one answered. Because the truth sat thick between them, they were the only thing left to want. As if in response, the dragging resumed, slower now, circling one last time. The chimes rang louder, echoing against the storm, closer than ever before. And when the dragging finally stopped, so did the wind. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath. The tent stood still, silent, but outside, something was waiting. The storm broke just before dawn. The rain tapered off into a soft drizzle, the wind retreating back into the trees, leaving behind only the steady drip of water from the branches overhead. The air felt hollow in its absence, like the storm had taken something with it or left something behind. Inside the tent, the three of them sat frozen, backs pressed together, afraid to move, unsure if the quiet was safety or another trap. The chimes no longer rang, but Jinx still felt them vibrating beneath her skin. Trevor was the first to speak, his voice a ragged whisper. "It's gone." He didn't sound convinced. He reached for Jinx's hand again, threading his fingers through hers, and this time she didn't pull away. His touch was warm despite the cold, steady despite the fear, anchoring her back to something real. For a moment Jinx leaned into him, drawing strength from his closeness, from the fact that they were still here. Regina pulled back the tent flap slowly, blinking against the pale grey light of early morning. The clearing looked untouched, peaceful, even like the storm had never happened. The lake stretched calm and still, reflecting the overcast sky, the mist rising gently from its surface. But something felt wrong. The campsite was silent, too silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, only the faint sound of water lapping at the shore. Jinx stepped outside with Trevor close behind, their hands still clasped, neither willing to break the connection just yet. The fire pit lay drowned and cold, their gear scattered but intact. But at the edge of the lake, just where the water met the land, something waited. A small bundle, neatly placed on the shoreline. Trevor moved toward it, hesitant, but Jinx's grip tightened. "Don't," she whispered, but his curiosity won. He crouched beside the bundle and unfolded it slowly. Inside lay Bobby's watch, still ticking, the hands frozen at 3:13 a.m. Wrapped in the band, tied delicately, was a small strip of cloth chimes woven between the threads. Trevor stood, holding the watch and the cloth between his fingers, his face draining of color as he turned it over in his hands. The metal felt unnaturally cold, as though it had just been dredged from the bottom of the lake. The chimes sewn into the cloth gave a faint rattle, though the morning air was still and heavy. Jinx edged closer, every nerve in her body tensing as she watched Trevor's hand tremble. Regina lingered back by the tents, arms wrapped tight around herself, as if any of them could pretend this was normal. Jinx's gaze drifted toward the lake, where a thick mist hovered inches above the water. The surface should have reflected the dull grey sky, but it didn't. It looked darker, like something was moving beneath. She blinked, squinting, convinced she saw a pale shape shift just below the surface, too big to be a fish, too still to be debris. A glimmer of skin, gone in an instant. She swallowed hard, the air tasting damp and metallic. Without warning, a sharp clang echoed through the clearing, harsh and discordant, snapping all of them to attention. The chimes in Trevor's hand rang once, twice, like they'd been struck, but there was no breeze, no movement. He dropped the bundle, the watch hitting the ground with a muffled thud. The ticking grew louder, filling the space between them, syncing with Jinx's heartbeat, each second pounding harder in her head until it felt like the world was pulsing around her. Regina took a step back, panic twisting across her face. "We need to leave," she whispered, voice cracking. "Right now." But neither Jinx nor Trevor moved. Their eyes remained fixed on the water's edge, where the mist had begun to roll inward, curling toward their feet like fingers stretching out. The lake's surface rippled again, faint but deliberate, breaking the heavy silence. Then the mist thickened, swallowing the shoreline whole, leaving only the faint ticking of the watch and the sensation that something was watching them back. Trevor stepped back from the water's edge, his breathing shallow, the mist curling closer around their ankles. He turned to Jinx, grabbing her hand with a desperate urgency, his eyes searching hers like they could both forget where they were. "We have to go," he whispered, voice cracking beneath the weight of panic. But the moment their hands touched, Jinx felt her heartbeat slow, the pull of the lake receding just enough to remind her they were still together. His grip was warm, steady, real. For a brief moment, she leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, the racing of his heart. Out here, in the suffocating silence of the woods, in the shadow of whatever lurked beneath the lake, Trevor felt like the only thing holding her to reality. "Don't let go," she murmured, and the fear in her voice startled her. She wasn't used to leaning on anyone. But now, the thought of losing him terrified her more than what waited in the water. Trevor's hands framed her face gently, his thumbs brushing the rain-slicked strands of hair from her skin. "I won't," he promised, his voice soft but steady. His lips hovered just over hers, and for a moment the world narrowed the ticking watch, the mist, the dread, they all faded. They kissed, brief but grounding. The touch, electric against the storm, still rumbling in their bones. But even as their lips parted, the unease returned, the press of the mist creeping closer, curling like smoke around their legs. Behind them, Regina's ragged breath broke through the fragile calm. "Please," she pleaded, eyes darting toward the lake, toward the mist swallowing the shoreline. "Don't let it take you too." Jinx broke away from Trevor, her hand still clutching his. She turned toward the lake one last time, heart thudding painfully in her chest. Somewhere beyond the mist, beneath the black surface, something waited. And even with Trevor's warmth grounding her, she felt the pull like the lake wanted to peel them apart, to drag them both under and leave only the echo of that brief, fleeting moment of love behind. Trevor squeezed Jinx's hand harder, as if he could sense her hesitation, feel the invisible thread pulling her toward the water's edge. "Look at me," he whispered, pulling her gaze away from the lake, back to his eyes wide with fear but filled with something steadier, something she could anchor to. "We're getting out of here. All." His voice shook, but there was determination beneath it, enough to make her believe they might just survive this. The mist thickened, crawling higher, curling around their knees, as if the lake had heard the promise and resented it. Jinx felt its weight pressing against her chest, making every breath harder to take. The shoreline blurred, the trees smudging into vague, shadowy shapes, the world shrinking down to the three of them, trapped in the clearing. The lake's surface rippled again just once, but it was enough to remind them they were never really alone. Regina's sobs grew sharper, her arms wrapped so tightly around herself that her fingers turned white. "We need to move," she stammered. "Please, please." She took a step back toward the tents, but the mist seemed to follow her, curling tighter around her ankles like chains. Trevor tugged Jinx's hand, pulling her back, his touch trembling now, but still refusing to let go. "Together," he said, voice firmer. "We stay together." They stumbled back toward camp, the world a blur of grey and damp, but the mist never loosened its grip. Every step felt like moving through water, their feet dragging heavier, slower, as if something beneath the earth was pulling back. Trevor moved ahead, guiding Regina with one hand, Jinx clinging to his other, the three of them tethered by desperation and something deeper, the will to hold on to each other. As they reached the tents, the mist began to recede, drawing back toward the lake, as if retreating for now. The trees regained their shapes, the sky lightened, though the sun never fully broke through the clouds. They collapsed together on the damp ground, gasping, hearts racing, the silence around them suffocating. Jinx pressed her forehead to Trevor's shoulder, feeling the pulse beneath his skin, letting it remind her she was still alive. "I can't lose you," Trevor whispered, so low only she could hear it. His breath hitched, his hand brushing the back of her neck, anchoring her to the moment. "I can't lose you to this." Jinx swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the rain. "You won't," she breathed, but the tremble in her voice betrayed the fear in her bones. Because deep down they both felt it, the forest wasn't done. Behind them, the faint ticking of Bobby's watch still echoed, the sound curling through the clearing like a warning. Jinx turned her head toward it, her skin crawling. "It's still going," she whispered. Trevor followed her gaze, frowning as he reached for the bundle, his fingers brushing the damp cloth. The chimes jingled softly at his touch, too softly for there to be no wind. Regina stood shakily, her gaze drifting back toward the lake. "Where do you think Bobby is?" she asked, her voice hollow. Neither Trevor nor Jinx answered. Because the truth was twisting in their stomachs, they didn't know if Bobby was still Bobby anymore. The mist clung low over the water's surface, like a veil hiding something beneath. And as they stared, the ripples returned, subtle, patient, reminding them that the lake wasn't finished. But it never let anyone go complete. Trevor pulled Jinx closer, his hand warm on the small of her back, grounding her as they both stared toward the mist-covered lake. The stillness of the water was worse now, oppressive, as though it held its breath, waiting. Jinx wanted to believe they could just turn and leave, that they could pack up the tents and escape back to the real world. But the weight of the woods pressed on her shoulders, the sensation that the trees, the lake, the mist, they'd all follow them home if they tried. The lake remembered them now. Regina gathered their gear in frantic, jerking motions, muttering under her breath, trying to convince herself that if they moved fast enough, they could still make it out. Trevor stuffed their half-soaked supplies into his bag, his eyes never fully leaving the water. Jinx felt the weight of the watch in her pocket, ticking faintly, an unwanted souvenir. She wanted to throw it back into the lake, but something stopped here, an instinct that severing that last thread might pull them back in. They left the campsite in silence, not daring to speak, not even daring to look back. The mist stayed low along the shoreline, curling out like it was reaching for them, but never crossing the line into the woods. The deeper they walked into the trees, the further the sounds of the lake faded, swallowed by the rustle of leaves and the creak of old branches. It was only when they saw Bobby's jeep at the trailhead that they let themselves believe they were really leaving. Trevor climbed into the driver's seat, hands trembling as he gripped the wheel, Jinx sliding into the passenger side, her legs weak beneath her. Regina sat in the back, silent, her gaze locked on the rearview mirror, watching the trees as though they might move. The engine turned over and the jeep rumbled to life, the normalcy of it jarring after the weight of the lake. They pulled onto the dirt road, the forest pressing close on either side. As they drove away, the sky brightened with the rising sun, the mist thinning behind them, but Jinx could still feel it, the faint pull at the back of her mind, the ticking of the watch in her pocket, steady and soft. And when she glanced back one last time, she swore she saw a figure standing at the edge of the waterfall, unmoving, its head tilted just a little too far to one side.